We are recording the interview of Frank Jackson, who prefers to be called by his nickname Eddie. This interview is being conducted by David Barry from the Wright State University's Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at the Holiday Inn Hotel in Fairborn, Ohio. It is 8 a.m. on June 8th, 2019. Why don't we start with where and when were you born?
I was born in Asheville, North Carolina, October the 19th, 1948.
And who were your parents and what were their occupation?
My parents' name was Frank Mills Jackson, and he worked for Southern Bell Telephone Company, and he was also a veteran of the U.S. Air Force, and he was a chief mechanic on the B-17. My mother was Jenny Sue Jackson, and she stayed a housewife and raised the children.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
I had two sisters. One was named Doris, and one was named Jean.
So what were you doing before you joined the military?
Well, right after I graduated from high school, I got a summer employment at the Veterans Administration until October, and that's when I was going to go in. That's when they arranged my time, so all my basic training, my tech schools and everything would line up. So I worked at the Veterans Administration on a temporary job from June to October.
What'd you do for the Veterans Administration?
I did too. I worked the first 400 hours. I worked with the ground crew outside, and then that expired, and they gave me another 400 hours, and I worked in building management for the rest of the time. They had just built a new hospital and were moving stuff from the old hospital to the new hospital, so it was a busy time.
What got you involved in the VA? Or I'm sorry, the Veterans Administration?
Well, I had a friend that went there and got a job, and so I just went and asked him. I got a job, and then later on, after I got out of the Air Force, I must have done a good job because my former boss man called me up, and he said, "Eddie," he says, "I hear you back in town." "Yes, sir." "Do you need a job?" "Yes, sir." "Can you be here tomorrow?" "Yes, sir." And that's how I got hired back on at the VA and stayed there for 43 years.
So, did your father's service or working for the VA or the draft or all three, did any of those have any weight in your decision to join the Air Force?
Well, probably my father. He was a chief mechanic on B-17, but that I had always wanted to be involved with weapons. And I had an interview with the Army, and I had an interview with the Air Force, and I chose the Air Force because they could arrange things, for me pretty much in order like I wanted. So I wasn't drafted. I enlisted.
So you were excited to serve and wanted to go?
Yeah, I wanted to serve. I was anxious to it. I couldn't decide whether I was going to college, and it was kind of making me worrisome and sick. And so when I made up my mind to choose the military over the college, everything settled down, and I pursued it.
How did your family feel about you joining the military?
They were okay with it. They encouraged me, and so I had no problems in that area.
So you join the Air Force, they get everything lined up for you, you leave for basic training. Where'd you go?
Well, my father left. I drove him to work at the Southern Bell Telephone Company, and I did a few little tasks, and then I drove the truck back, parked it at the telephone company, and I walked down to the bus station and waited on the bus to take me to Charlotte.
And then once you got there, how was it for you?
Well, I got down to the induction center and had to go through the gates at the induction center under guard because that's time of heavy protest, and But after I got through the gate, everything smoothed out. And then the next day, we traveled down to Lackland and started the basic training.
How was basic training for you?
Well, it was an adjustment, and I decided I would do my best. And I didn't have any trouble. I did what I was supposed to, and I respected all my leaders and stuff like that. And so I did okay.
So did you get to choose your job then before basic, or did you choose it while you're in basic?
I chose it before basic because that was the reason my waiting from June to October was so that I could get in the weapons career field.
And then, what was your job then?
In basic or
well, in the military.
Oh, well, as soon as I graduated from the basic training, I went to Lowry Air Force Base in Denver, Colorado, and that's where the weapons loading school was. And I completed that and went home for a 30-day leave. And after a 30-day leave, we went straight to NKP, Thailand for a year.
Oh, right out of training and straight to deployment.
Right, yeah. Straight to the job site. I was trained to load F-100s, and I've never loaded one day of my life because when I got to Nakhon Phanom, they had A-1 Sky Raiders, and so that's what I loaded bombs and weapons on for a year.
So, loading ammunition onto this aircraft, was that ever stressful, or were you ever worried about dropping a bomb? Or?
Well, the first thing we were taught was safety. And so, of course, handling that type of explosive material, you have to be careful. It didn't cause a lot of stress on me because we had a crew of 4 people, and each person had responsibilities. We had a crew chief, we had a checklist, and then the other 3 people were listed as on the crew as crew member 2, crew member 3, and crew member 4, and I was crew member 3. And we all loaded so much that when we came up to the airplane, we knew what to do. We prepped our munitions. We took our bomb lifts and placed our munitions into another bomb lift, and then they would go and they would to a rack and they would lock the munitions in. And then, depending on what type it was, if it was a rocket, we loaded the rocket pods. If it's cannons, we loaded the 20 millimeter ammo, and if it was other type of ordnance, we would adjust it to make sure that it was tight, wasn't going to fall off, and put our safety pins. Each piece of ordnance had a safety pin, and when the aircraft was ready to fly, it would go down to what they called the arm end of the runway. And that's where you would torque the guns in for final, and you'd pull all safety pins. And when we come out, we gave the pilot a thumbs up that he was ready to go, and we'd welcome him back.
So how'd your family feel about you deploying over to Thailand?
Well, at that time, the Nakhon Phanom was a secret air base, and I couldn't really tell them where I was going. But after I got over there, I wrote and told them where I was at. But, I was 12,000 miles away, there for a year, and I wrote letters back and forth all the time, and me and my girlfriend, which is my wife now, we had a tape recorder, and we would take things back and forth to each other and write each other. So when I come back stateside, we got married, and this month is the 28th of June is our 50th wedding anniversary.
Oh wow! Congratulations.
And so 50 years of one woman.
Did you meet her before you joined the military, or after?
I met her in high school in about the 11th grade. Her father had worked for Carolina Power and Light Company, and they were down in Wilmington, North Carolina, and moved back to Asheville because his father lived in Asheville, and I met her in 11th grade.
And did you guys pretty much date throughout high school, and then?
No, not right away. But the day that I asked her for first date, kind of, was I took her to a baseball game at Reynolds, where the high school I went to, and it was good. And then I got home, her mother came out on the porch and told him to send me on my way. And the reason for that was her mother had just passed away in their living room, so I didn't get a chance to meet her right then.
And how did she feel when you went over and deployed?
Well, I had a good friend that lived in Georgia. My mom, dad, and my wife took me down to Georgia, and she was okay with it. I mean, she worked at a telephone company too. And I told my dad, I said, "No, when it comes time to go," I said, "you get in the car and you get them and y'all go." Because that was a hard time for everybody. So once we started on our way, then me and my friend Tony, we flew to Atlanta and went to over to Thailand together. So he was always a good friend.
Did you meet him while you were in the service?
I met him when I was at Lowry Air Force Base in Colorado, and a lot of us went to the same school there. We all got orders to the same place at the same time. So when I went there, I knew quite a lot of people. So that probably helped me adjust. You know what I'm saying? Because I had friends there.
So when you got deployed to Thailand, was that the first time that you'd ever left the country?
Oh yes, I'd never been outside the country. Hardly had been outside of North Carolina. But I know it's a long way away, but I looked at it as a kind of adventure, you know. I knew it was going to be hard work, and it was.
Do you remember? I'm sorry, go ahead.
The first 72 days when we arrived in Thailand, we worked 72 days straight without a day off, 12 hours a day. And that was during what was called the Tet Offensive. And they had 3 squadrons of these A-1 Sky Raiders, and we were busy.
So do you remember how it was, or any thoughts or feelings that went through your head when you first got off the plane into Thailand?
When I first got off the plane, it was, I said, what am I doing here? And they bought a pallet of luggage up to the tarmac where everybody could get it, and they took the cover off the tarmac. There was one duffel bag at the very top that came rolling down and landed in a mud puddle, and guess whose it was? It was mine. So that was my first day. My luggage fell into the mud puddle, but it got better after that. Everything at this base was remote, isolated. So it wasn't built up greatly. We had enough what they called hooches were kind of boards with slats and screen wire, and a cover over it, and that was kind of our home.
Were you ever worried about attack? Or?
Well, you always worried about that. I mean, we were, as far as being close to North Vietnam, we were closer than most bases in South Vietnam to North Vietnam, so we always had that worry and threat. But the year I was there, we wasn't never attacked. We had some days that they called for people to be careful and cautious, alerts, I guess you'd say. But we had several alerts, and a couple times we had to go to the bomb shelters, but it worked out okay.
So did you do anything for recreation or fun while you were there?
Well, after we worked 12 hours a day, we didn't really feel like doing a whole lot. If I worked night shift from 6 at night to 6 in the morning, I would leave the work site and go eat breakfast and sleep until it got so hot you had to get up, and then at 6 o'clock you was back at work. So you didn't have a whole lot of time. You would go to the post office, you'd go to PX, and some people that had jobs that they just worked 8 hours a day, but mine was 12, and we never got to do that. We didn't have much recreation time. But it's because of the career field.
During your work shift, did you have downtime, or was it pretty constantly busy with just reloading the next aircraft and getting it on the mission?
Well, occasionally we would have an hour or so downtime because we couldn't go load the weapons till the aircraft was ready. And when we got to the aircraft, we put it on red flagged aircraft where nobody could be working on the airplane while we were loading weapons. And that was just a safety factor that once we started loading weapons, we were in charge of that aircraft. And the maintenance people, everybody had to step back.
Was there any retention, or did everyone kind of abide by that rule?
Well, some people chomping at the bits because they wasn't quite ready for us to be there. But once the controller assigned us the aircraft to load, and like I said, we red flagged the aircraft documents, and we came, and everybody else got away. Let us do our job.
That's good. Were there any events or memories that stick out during that time during Thailand?
Yeah, we had an amphitheater there, and Bob Hope brought his entourage there to NKP, and he always went to a lot of places and entertained the troops. You know, he spent, I don't know how many years he spent away from home entertaining the troops. So I've always had great respect for Bob Hope.
And he worked really closely with the USO.
Yeah, it was a USO sponsored thing, and he had a group that came with him. And up where I was at, we didn't have a lot of women on our base. We called them round eyes, and he would always bring some nice looking women. And so, you know, it was. But everything, even at that. They had to guard against the threat, you know. So, but he always did a good job. I was thankful to have seen Bob Hope.
So after your year deployment in Thailand, where did you go?
Well, most of the guys that I knew, we got orders to the same place. We went to George Air Force Base. It was near Victorville, California, and we went from A-1 Sky Raiders to loading F-4s, and that base was a training base for pilots that were going over to Southeast Asia. So we had 4 squadrons of F-4s, and same story again. We worked 12 hours a day, and but we would get a day off, or 2 days off. So it wasn't quite as bad. And so me and my wife had got married, and the day after we got married, we traveled to George Air Force Base. Stayed there for 2.5 more years. And her family didn't come out to see us, and we didn't get to go back. So it gave us a good long time to adjust to being married, you know what I'm saying?
So did you have an aircraft that you preferred working on over the other, the F-100, F-4, or A-1?
Well, the A-1 was nostalgic. I liked working on it, and I liked working on the F4. It's just they were both. I like working on both of them.
Was there one that was a little bit more tricky, or?
Well, the A1 was a little tricky in some specs. Like one responsibility of mine was I had to load the 20 millimeter inboard 20 millimeter cannon, and I'd have to go through the wheel well and push the ammo boxes to it. And I always struggled joining the links with my hand. And after about 6 months, I had some guys that came from Herbert Field, Florida, and they had proper training. And he said, "Oh, look, here's a little clip right here. You just put it right there, pop it, and it goes right in place." So here I'd been struggling for 6 months trying to get these ammo links joined together, and this guy showed me a shortcut and made things a lot better. But every time I went in there, I would lay my sunglasses in the wheel well, and I'd forget. So when the airplane come back, they were never there. I lost 3 or 4 pairs of sunglasses because I would put them down to sea, and you know, I'd forget about them being in there. So I enjoyed loading both. The type of munitions that we loaded on the A1 was pretty much different than what we loaded on the F4. Some similarity, but a lot of differences.
What was the main difference? Size,
Well,
or?
the main difference on the A1 was we were loading weapons for close-in support on one mission, and then we would load heavier stuff if they were going to go for hard surfaces or hard targets. And we loaded a lot of napalm, and then when I come back stateside, we never loaded napalm in the U.S. We loaded the rockets and the bombs and the cannons, but some of the other bombs, like the white phosphorus bombs, we never loaded again. But they were all for close-in support, you know.
When you got to your second base, you said you were working 12-hour shifts. But did you have any time at that time to have any recreation or anything?
Oh, yeah. When I first got there, the first few months, I was on night shift, and my wife got a job at a telephone company, and she worked day shift. So there for 3 or 4 months, we didn't get to see much of each other. But after that, it kind of eased off, and we would go places. We went to one of the things that they offered returning vets from Southeast Asia was you could get 2 Disney World tickets for $1 each. So we went to Disneyland about 3 or 4 times, and we traveled around California and went to Big Bear Mountains, and you know, you have your friends again that I knew, so we had you know, events at each other's houses and went places, and so it pretty much turned into a normal job, except you had to work around your shift and everything. But then it kind of eased up for a while, and we went to an 8-hour shift. But when they sent 3 or 4 crews on deployment, temporary duty someplace else, we had to go back to 12-hour shifts because we didn't have enough people to cover it. So anyway, I enjoyed working on both planes.
So you said that you were there for another 2.5 years and then got out?
Yeah, I got out at that time. I didn't know if I wanted to make a career or not. So when my enlistment ended, me and my wife towed I had a truck and a car, so I towed the car behind the truck. Behind the truck, and headed back to North Carolina, and that's when I got the job at the VA. And later on in my years, I wanted to get on the telephone company or the power company, but Carolina Power and Light wouldn't hire relatives, or I'd be sent off someplace else. And the telephone company had didn't have any openings. So when I got employed at the VA, I was happy with that. So
Were you still doing property management, or?
I did property management. Well, when I joined the VA, I was working in supply, and that was property management. And short time after that, I joined the Army National Guard, which is in Hendersonville, and they were mechanized infantry, and that was something different. It was still involved weapons, and so I stayed with them for 9 years till I moved to the North Carolina National Guard as a traditional guardsman. I wasn't a full-time, but I was a part-time worker. So I worked for the VA and also worked for the North Carolina National Guard.
So what made you want to go into the Army National Guard then?
Well, it was close. It's 20 miles away, and Hendersonville's, like I said, 20 miles away, and I knew several people, so I fitted right into that too. You learn your job, you do be as safe as possible, and you learned all those things. So I incorporated that as part of my life, and then when I moved to transferred to the Air National Guard, when I talked to Colonel, I was putting base supply there. So I was in some familiar surroundings, and I worked for a man, my boss man, I worked for 15 years. He was the best man I've ever worked for. And, if you can get over him being your supervisor and being a friend too, then you've accomplished what you needed to accomplish. So that was always my goal, is to create a friend as I go. And he was my boss man for 15 years. So when he retired, he was a full-time guardsman. So when he retired, me being a traditional guardsman, I got his slot. And so we both went to the NCO Academy before he retired, and that was the best move I've ever made. Even though I went to AB Tech College for 3.5 years while working at the VA, what did me more good than anything was going to the NCO Academy up in Knoxville, Tennessee. And that opened more doors and did more for me than anything I did. So I was glad I got that opportunity.
What kind of doors did that open for you?
Well, when I joined the Air National Guard, I was an E6 in the Army, and they brought me in as an E6. However, I stayed at E6 for 12 years, and so after that 12 years, I decided that it was time for me to go to the academy and see if I couldn't help myself a little better. And so that, like I said, that was the best move I ever made. So when my boss retired, I took over the section, and I told all my people that I would be the best boss they ever had. We would work things out daily. I said every month we would have a section meeting, and we'd have a bulletin board where we could write, our problems, our issues, and our appointments down. And I said I would be their best supervisor, but I would expect something back from them. That would be some loyalty. So as it worked out, I gave everybody's used to doing one task. So I gave everybody 2 tasks to learn. And first month they didn't know if that was good or not, but by the second month they were excited about doing something different. And they did that for 2 years, and then when I retired 2 years later, on September the 9th, 2001, which was 2 days before 9/11 happened, short time after that, they all got deployed more than once. And by that, knowing more than one job had helped them out in their career and doing their job.
Great. So, were you just coming up on your retirement time then, or was there any reason that you decided to get out?
Well, there was two reasons. First off, I had always wanted to be promoted while I was at summer camp. And so my major called and told me that I was going to get my promotion to senior master sergeant. And I said, well, sir, I said, my family's wanting me to retire, to get out of the Guard. And I said, I'd like for you to talk to my wife. So he did. And she told me that it would be okay if I went a couple more years. So after that, I said, okay. So I had to stay 2 years to make my rank count for retirement. So in January of 2001, my father got killed on our property with a tree falling on him. And that kind of changed my needs to be at home. So from January to September, a guy in personnel told me that he had a chief master sergeant slot lined up, but I would have to travel to Raleigh every month. And so I thought about that long and hard, and I had to put my family first. So circumstances changes your outlook on things.
So, once you got out of the Guard, then did you go back to work for the VA, or were you still working for the VA?
I worked for the VA till December 2009, and retired from that. And in my Sunday school class, this is starting of the Iraq War, and I told people in my Sunday school class if they had a family member or a friend that was going over there, I'd be glad to write them a letter of encouragement. I said that's what I could do as a retired senior master sergeant. So I had one couple that gave me a name, which was their relative, and I wrote him a letter, and he wrote back or called people in my Sunday school class that he had gotten my letter. I was very appreciative. And the next day, the guy that was in my Sunday school class called me up early in the morning and gave me the news that Joe didn't make it. So I didn't know the guy, but I felt like I did. But I did that. I wrote 3 or 4 letters. One guy I wrote to 5 different times. And so it was all encouragement. Working together, encouragement, and being safe.
Were there any life lessons you feel that you learned from your military service?
Life lessons? Yeah, safety, duty, honor, country, and the 3 most important was faith, family, and friends.
Well, I only have a couple more questions left. Do you feel that, is there anything that you feel that we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview?
No, the only thing I can say is no matter what job you have, you need to do it the best you can. And that's whether you're getting paid or whether you're doing it as volunteer, you do the best job you can. And create a friend as you go.
That's a pretty good message. Would you like to leave it there, or is there any other message you'd like to leave for future generations that might view this interview?
No, I think the one I mentioned about duty, honor, and country, and faith, family, and friends. That's when I retired from the North Carolina Air National Guard. That was my parting statement. And I had watched a retirement from a guy that was stationed here as a B-52 pilot. And his final words were, remember your faith, family, and friends. And so I incorporated that into my thought and into my retirement and into my life. I would like to say one thing. Right after 9/11, this couple we always go to the beach with, we went to Fort Fisher, which is a kind of military recreation center in North Carolina. And we went to the battleship North Carolina. And there was a guy standing over there, and he had a hat on that said original crew person. So I went over and asked him, I said, sir, does your hat tell a true story? He said, yes, it does. He was an original World War II crew person on the original vessel, North Carolina battleship. And I said, sir, we sure like the vessel and everything it stands for. And he says, do you have time for me to go with you? And I said, oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. So he took us around, and we saw where he worked, where he slept, where he ate. And we came back up topside, and of course I thanked him. But that was a high honor. And when I got back home, I called the battleship to get his address. They said, oh, well, he still maintains the post office box here on the battleship. So I wrote him a thank you letter, and a short time after that, there's a magazine in North Carolina called Our State Magazine, and they had an article about this very guy. So he chose us, and this is like in November of 2001, right after 9/11 happened. So we needed something, and he provided us. But it is an honor for him and me too. So anyway, I tried to encourage my son. He's a firefighter. And I said, well, James, I said, so once you join the Guard, you could get flight line experience, you could get a lot of different firefighting experiences. No, he didn't want to. And I said, well, tell him one time, I'll never ask you again in my lifetime. And he said, well, Dad, you have to wear a uniform. But what does he do every day when he goes to work? He wears a uniform. But I've always considered firefighters, policemen, and emergency workers equal to a military person. And that's my story.
Well, that concludes our interview. I just want to say thank you for taking the time for doing this interview, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.